Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. First hour is general discussion about media and virtual production. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're actually going to spend more time on questions. We had about 2 or 3 people that were possible for today, and that didn't work out. So we'll have 2 hours of questions. So it'll be open discussion. Tomorrow, we'll be talking about logistics. How do we get gear and things in and out of our office, our state, country, continent? How do we move all those around? And so we'll have an open discussion about that. On Saturday, of course, we have education. We don't put the whole education online, so you have to be here for that. It's 8 to 10 every Saturday morning. Then at 10 o'clock, we're going to come back online. We're going to talk about Keynote, and we're specifically going to talk about using live video inside of Keynote, so stay tuned for that. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Bill, what do we got?
Our first one comes from James Hutchinson in Dublin, Ireland, and James says, yesterday, Microsoft announced that their Walkie Talkie feature for Teams has been released across all platforms, mobile and desktop. Has anyone tried it? It seems like it might be possible to have multiple channels.
Go ahead, Rupert.
I haven't tried it. I did see the feature coming. I do believe it'll be a channel type subscription ability in there, like you might expect. I'm not sure that it'll be entirely real time as something like Unity. My experience of these PTT cloud-based systems is, it's doing it over TCP, so there's a bit of store and forward, just a little bit of latency, certainly more than you'd like, for real time comms.
So it's more of a send and receive, like you're sending a message, low latency message sending.
Yeah, I envision it to be something a bit like sort of Zello in terms of performance. It gets there, but not always instantly.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Is it meant to be used in conjunction with a meeting, or is it sort of their entry into?
I think it's a little Zoom like Apple's Walkie Talkie. You have a big team, they're all working, and the idea is that you have kind of I just want to talk to Chris for a second, and I hit a button, hey, Chris, what about this, blah, 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 and then let it go, and then you send back an answer. So that when you're thinking about a distributed team and you don't want to have teams opened all the time, you could theoretically just, have somebody or have a PL, essentially, of a group of people that you could talk to. So I'm going to push this button down, just like you would with a walkie-talkie. I mean, it really is a walkie-talkie, except that it's not constrained to a specific area. So, I think that it's just a lot of times when we're working on teams, not on teams, but in global teams, being able to be working away and being able to just have a push button rather than having to dial the person up or set up a call or do anything else. I just want to push a button and ask the team a question or let them know something's happening, just the way we would use a PL in production. But globally, and having it built into the OS, I think makes a lot of sense. Apple already does it, with their walkie-talkie feature. I never use it, but I know it's there. But theoretically, families could be also talking about it. So think about everybody at a amusement park, and you could tell everyone, hey, we're meeting at blah, blah, blah. How would I call everybody? Like, it would be just a pain in the neck to call everybody. Now you could text them, I guess, but you could also have it where you could let everybody know you're doing something or going somewhere.
Have they done any research at all about how many people don't listen to their voicemail anymore? I think voice is probably voice over text. Text is going to win.
It does,
90% of the time.
I'm a big text person, as you know. I prefer a lot of things to be over text. I don't want to talk a lot of times, because I'm usually doing something else or other things like that. But I will say there's a lot of things that just are hard to handle with text. Like there's definitely times, almost every day, there's some point where I'm texting back and forth with someone and I just call them. I know that we're both sitting here texting. I'm like, let's just discuss this. Like, why are we? Yeah, it's just like, this is crazy. And so you just jump on a phone call and call them and sort it out. And I think that's where this steps over. It's like halfway between texting and a Teams call, like it's, or a phone call. It's like, I can just push the button down and just ask everybody something and then go back to what I'm doing. Go ahead, Rupert.
There's a couple of use cases which we may be overlooking. One is the enterprise space. Think of retail where you've got the staff walking around, all those people with little two-way radios. The cloud players want that market too. It's the two-way radio comms thing, and also in certain jurisdictions. And last I knew, this was the case in the UK. For example, in the UK, it's illegal to drive and talk, be holding a phone, but not illegal to be using a half duplex radio. So you can be holding a microphone with a PTT. That is legal. You cannot hold a phone and talk full duplex.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think that at the retail market, I think that that'll be really, really hard for them to break in, because those tools are really well designed. If you look at the Motorola tools and the and some of the other the company that owns Clearcom, I just can't think of the name of them right now, that own those tools are super defined and very low latency and work really well. It'd be a very hard place to crack in. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Another place that it could actually go into is the warehouse, because last time I knew that the RF guns have gotten super smart. I mean, they were on the Microsoft operating system. I'm still guessing that they're on some sort of Microsoft OS there, and you could easily put Teams onto the gun, so the front of the office can actually radio the back to say, "Hey, can you pick up that part from the warehouse and bring it up front?"
I'd be surprised, though. I mean, I think that in areas that are geographically limited, like that you're in a warehouse, you're in a school, you're in a whatever, that's not a place that this stuff works that competes with radio. RF is so much faster and lower latency, and those tools are really well defined and very cheap. So I think that it's very hard to get over that hump. But I think in a distributed team, once you geographically distribute, I think it becomes much. Those tools are really. The thing is those tools are really hard to do. So when you're in an area where you can do radio coverage, it's very hard to compete with the radios. But when
I've worked at warehouses where the RF was just horrible, and sometimes you'd go into an area, especially depending on what you had in your warehouse, and then all of a sudden the RF just didn't work at all. So this would actually be an alternative.
This is really bad RF design. Someone should be fired for that. It's not hard. You just got to put antennas in the right place. Go ahead, Rupert.
The dispatch market too, like dispatching service technicians, plumbers and stuff like that. Teams, PTT, here's the service order, it's coming through to your smartphone, click, 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 all that stuff. And on the RF side, I mean, it's true. Some of that, on-site RF stuff is pretty robust. What's interesting about the newer generations, the Motorola equipment, for example, in the enterprise space, is all that stuff is cloud managed. They provision a lot of those radios, like provision themselves via the cloud, but then communicate locally via RF. So it's getting cloudified one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Next one comes to us from James Hutchinson in Dublin, Ireland again. He says, what's the minimum spec the panel would recommend for a streaming light for it to be useful? Lumens, color, control, power.
Go ahead, Bill.
So this is a tough one for me because of this. Any light is useful if you're in a situation where the light is totally inadequate. And so if you're in a place where you have to podcast or webcast and you're sitting in front of a bright window and you have no light, it's going to be a disaster. So even if the light itself is substandard, and I wouldn't pick it for anything else, if I needed to bring up somebody's face to get the audience to be able to see their facial expressions, because that helps communication, I would use it. Now, so that's the base. Any light is better than no light. But once you get past that, you get into all sorts of individual little quality measurements. You want broad spectrum. You don't want spikes. Fluorescents were notorious for having green spikes, and some are very, in mixed light situations, very yellow looking. So you want to get rid of those things. Broad spectrum, a broad light that shows on a subject from multiple directions. So a large panel will light you from many directions, where a pinpoint light will create harsh shadows. Those things are important. And then you get into the circumstances of what's the view you're going to give the audience. That'll determine how far from the person you want to position that light and how much power you need for that. To light somebody in the initial circumstance I gave them against a window, you need quite a bit of power. We used to have to get these big HMI lights to fight a window in some corporate exec's office. Nowadays, LED panels are getting strong enough, particularly the Cobb chip-on-board ones, that some of those are beginning to become useful for that kind of circumstance where we needed really specialist equipment in the early days. So the good news of all this is there's never been more inexpensive, well-operable lights, but there are just a lot of them. So you have to just learn and you have to adapt them to your situation.
Go, Rupert.
I'm just trying to put the question into context in terms of what's minimal, but whether it's cost or size or what. I mean, I can tell you, I just use, I've got a softbox kit from Amazon, and I've put some 5500K bulbs in it on a dimmer. So, I mean, it's, I don't know, it was less than $100 for what I have. It may not be perfect, but it gets me by.
Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I think also if you think about what what you're lighting. So if you're talking about background light, you can get by with a lot of a variety of that. For example, I bought some of these. They're just little $25 lights or whatever from Amazon, and you can put RGB color into it and, you know, throw it on the background like you see there. So it's not perfect, but, you know, if you want to just kind of bring an accent color to something, that's a light that would be more of an accent light, not maybe what you're talking about in front of you, but certainly that's a color. Just throw color in different places and you can see it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I would say that I would say the minimum size is about 10 inches, in my opinion. Like, I don't buy a lot that's less than 10 inches at this point. When I say, like, well, what's the minimum there? I don't know exactly. I don't know exactly what I would say in lumens, but most of the modern lights that are that size can handle it. You want a CRI of probably 95, 96 or above, you know, to make that work. But those are the kind of the hard numbers that you probably want to look at. Some people will say that you need bicolor. We've gotten away with 5600 a lot. I definitely don't do 3200. You can always turn the lights off in the house. You can't turn the sun off. So that's what we've learned. And so 5600 is the if you don't have the money for a bicolor, you know, don't do that. The sun is really hard. Like, I'm just telling you, it's hard to turn off. Next question.
David Paskin in Miami, Florida is up next. He says, I need to pin a participant in Zoom to my second monitor so I can screen scrape them while another participant is spotlighted. Is this possible? Do I need to spotlight first and then pin, or the other way around?
Go ahead, Rupert.
If I'm interpreting this right, I think you would need to pin first and then spotlight, would be my take on it.
See, I would take it the other way, that you'd have to spotlight and then pin to the other screen.
I don't think he's going to be able to do what he thinks he can do.
I think that what you want is Zoom ISO. like that's, I mean, like, this is a Zoom ISO problem. You know, once you get used to Zoom ISO, there's a whole lot of like pinning and spotlighting thing that makes you crazy. You know, like, you're like, why am I doing this? Once you use it, you can't. It's very hard to go back. Go ahead, Rupert.
I guess the other way is, if you could go through the hoops to enable your client to join the same meeting twice, you could bring up a second instance of Zoom with just purely that participant pinned there and use that.
Yeah. The point I'm trying to make is that Zoom ISO is really good. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Jacob Goodnight in Indianapolis. Can the panelists share their experience with enterprise streaming video on demand platforms? And he uses as examples Kaltura, Panopto, and Qumu, and so forth.
Go, Rupert.
I've heard of the first two, and we were actually, I think, discussing a couple of these in After Hours yesterday and comparing them also to Microsoft Stream, which is the Microsoft streaming platform, video management, content management thing in the Office 365 ecosystem. So that might just be one to bear in mind also. I had to go check on the Panopto and Kaltura. I had seen Panopto has an app in Zoom App Marketplace to integrate Zoom with Panopto, and turns out Kaltura does also. So at least I can say that about those two.
Yeah, another one you want to look at is, I mean, for kind of a more of a bespoke solution, one that's really popular is called UStudio. Long ago, I used to do work for On Networks, which became UStudio, and they do a lot of, especially companies that are doing podcasting and need to kind of manage the VODs that are, you know, basically designed for internal enterprise. I would highly recommend checking them out. Next question.
Simon Ray in Shrewsbury, UK says, would it be safe to regularly run a Blackmagic Pocket 4K cinema camera from mains only without a battery fitted, or could the regular spikes on powering up damage the device? I'm looking to fire up most of the studio from one main switch.
Go ahead, Bill.
I think that's changed a lot over the course of the last few years. Power supply design is a real known science now, and I think a manufacturer like Blackmagic, who has a reputation for having really, really good engineering teams behind them, will have taken into consideration the use cases for their camera. I've been running my Blackmagic 6K for this entire time I've been on office hours, so we're at 600 shows now, and I've always left it in. It's on a switch on the panel in front of me, so I powered up through mains every day for the show, and it's given me no problems whatsoever. So I'm feeling pretty confident that it's not required. As to whether you keep the battery in there or not, the only thing that I would suggest is if you're any risk of the power going off, having the backup battery fully charged in the camera might give you a boost, but that's it.
Next question.
Next one from Jack B in Phoenix, Arizona. And Jack says, when using a cage with a camera, do you take it apart for transportation or store the camera in the cage?
I go with Jesse.
We keep it in the cage for protection and convenience.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Chris.
When I used to travel with the question becomes, Jack, how many shots do you want to miss? So like if you have to stop and build up a camera, you're going to miss stuff. When I used to travel, mostly, travel photography, I carried a Canon 5D Mark, whatever first one that made video with a, $2,500 lens.
Mark II.
Mark
5D,
II.
Mark II.
Yeah. And I carried it on the plane, and when the plane took off, I put it on the floor in front of me, and I put my foot on top of it so it wouldn't slide to the back of the plane. Like I literally put my foot on top of the camera, because when a camera is in a case, there's a lot of pictures you won't take.
They're just really dark. Pictures are dark. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
The only issue is if you have like a long cage or something like that, or bars or anything else. The at-home kit, all our at-home kits are in a cage, and the only thing that the person is tasked to do, other than put it onto the tripod, is put on the light, because that's the only thing that doesn't get fully protected by the cage. Other than that, everything stays exactly where it is.
Yeah, I put cages. I mean, I just had a cat run across something, knock over a monopod that had a camera on it. It had a cage, and it was fine. And it is a, one of the first things I do when I buy a video camera, a Blackmagic camera, one of the 6Ks, is I put it in a cage. Like the cage comes with it. It goes into the cage, it never comes out. Like it's just, and with the little micros that I've used in the past, put those in cages. And the big thing is now you have this erector set that you can kind of build on. But it's too much of a pain in the neck, as Jesse said earlier, just too much of a pain in the neck to take it in and out. I'd rather just have a case or a bag or whatever that is designed for it. Next question.
Next one comes from Rupert McRae here in the panel in Dallas, Texas. Zoom has announced a work transformation summit to be held on Zoom events next week. The event is described as a gathering of industry thought leaders in discussion to help businesses tackle work evolution. What might we expect from this event?
Obviously, it's good business for Zoom to talk about, how you can run your business, more effectively inside of Zoom. It's the future because, the highest performance, what's happening over and over again is the highest performance employees are starting to just say, I'm not coming in, like not the highest, but like there's a huge group, and, a larger and larger group of those that you can't say no to are saying, I don't want to play. And as they do that, it becomes harder and harder for companies to say you have to come back into the office, especially in a position when there's an enormous demand for workers. And so if you're already effective and you don't want to be there, there's a lot of companies that will hire you and they'll give you the virtual. I now have probably 4 or 5 friends that were at very large companies who said you had to come back into the office, and they just said no, and they just got another job that paid more than they were getting paid before. And they were just like, so they just kind of shrugged and just moved on. And that's what's going to keep happening. Go ahead, David.
Well, one thing I'm hoping for is that they kind of start swaying people away from the glass box where Zoom rooms are installed. There was a feature I noticed. They released a update to Zoom rooms, and they added a beta feature called hoteling or hot desking for Zoom rooms. So you can register a room that users can request and go into those rooms and kind of log in, use them as their own computers, which looked interesting.
Yeah, that's kind of a hybrid. And a lot of big companies, if you walk into them, they have these little booths that they've had for years. I mean, Google would have like rows of them because they just have Hangouts, and that would just let people jump into a meeting, because the problem is that they couldn't just do it at, if you have an open office, you need to have somewhere for people to have private conversations. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I was just going to say, good on Zoom for this reason. A lot of companies kind of keep everything inside, and they don't really do much outreach to customers to figure out what they really need. So these kind of circumstances, a summit where you can mingle with a lot of people and maybe get into voices that they don't normally hear from, really does help, I think. I remember being at one of the NABs decades ago, and I was walking past one of the big booths, and I had a rig with me, and it was a company who sold things that you could build rigs out of. And I remember them saying, hey, can you come here for a second? We just want to talk to you. And they asked me why I made the decisions that I made. I didn't see any of that in any of their products, but it was interesting that they were still out there surveying the marketplace and seeing, is there something we're missing? And I think Zoom's doing the same thing by putting on these kind of events. And if you do have good ideas and you can attend these things, sometimes you get noticed and they will maybe give you a chance to interact more.
I just only hope that they actually run the event well. I mean, I feel like Zoom does not currently run their own events very effectively. I mean, they use all those virtual backgrounds and it's all goofy, and it's just they don't, if they're going to sell this idea, they have to up their game a lot. Like their own game is really not great when it comes to events, and so hopefully they'll make that better. Next question.
Junior Grant in New York is up next. He says, is there an audio interface other than the Sound Devices MixPres with noise assist like features?
Not really. I mean, there's other people with noise assist, noise reduction. So there's noise reduction in other devices. That's kind of a standard, relatively common thing. If you're on a Mac or PC, there's plugins that can possibly do it in real time. But the noise assist and the cedar reduction are pretty unique as far as their quality, the amount of fidelity that you retain when getting rid of all the noise. A lot of the other noise reduction will make it feel very muffled as it pulls it out. They're just not as able to fine tune. Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, right back again with Logitech has released a new video light called the Litra Glow. Any thoughts from the panel? Might we expect this light to match nicely with the Brio, for example?
To get back to the earlier question that I was talking about, the size, I would not spend a lot of money on a light that, or almost any money on a light that was smaller than 10 inches. Like when you talk about a webcam light, it's all sourcey. That's the real problem, is that everything's, unless it's like right here. And believe me, I've bought literally 100 of lights that are like 4-inch lights. Other than little highlight lights for like close-ups or something for an accent, I don't think that those lights are viable for web. Jeffrey?
So yeah, the light is its own light. It's on its own stand, so you can actually move it away from the camera. So it'll be perfect for anybody that's doing meetings. But the other thing is,
except for the fact that it's sourcey. Like it's sourcey.
Yeah,
it looks sourcey.
Well, the other thing is,
when you say
I'm
perfect,
surprised.
I just want to kind of call you on that one because it's not perfect.
No, but okay, it will work for somebody that
Kind
has
of.
a C920 and is using it
when
for
you've given
meetings. The bigger question is, I didn't know that that Logitech bought Litra. So if this is not a Litra, that might be a problem right there.
I think are you talking about Litro? Litro is defunct, I think, or the assets were bought.
No, it's Litra. I'll double check, but I'm pretty
There's
sure
a
it's
camera
Litra.
company called Litro, and it's not there anymore. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I was just going to say, there is one way you can do this. It is more complex and it requires a little more thinking, but there's an old photographer's technique where you take a relatively small thing and you put it into a softbox system where it spreads the light from the small light onto a bigger thing. Right now, my key light is a Lowell Tota LED that's sitting behind a strip box to make it very wide, and that's what's providing the relatively soft shadows out of it. Right. So it takes more rigging and it's harder to do, but you can make a small light wider through that kind of diffusion.
Right. Good, Bill. Paul?
Yeah, it's a good compliment to the Brio because it's got a little thing you can attach it to the top of a laptop, and it's a good run and go light.
Yeah, I still think that I'm just after years and years and years of buying little lights because they were convenient, I would recommend against it. Like it's not like that form factor. If you're going to get it to be convenient, because otherwise you're going to end up doing what Bill did, which is put it behind something else. So bouncing it off a white card or doing something else. But if you start doing that, there's lots of things that'll do that. so it just becomes one of those things. Like I get that a lot of people will buy it, and that's unfortunate because that kind of it's convenient, but it's a little light. It's just that it's sourcey. And it really makes a huge difference to have something that's larger that you can get for the same price from newer or other people. Next question.
Steve Bodner in Colorado Springs is up next. He says, is anyone using AWS, Amazon Web Services, to host Davinci Resolve to edit on in virtual workstations? And if so, what kind of instances work best?
I have not seen people using Resolve in the cloud. That has not been a behavior that I've I've seen. I don't think it's impossible. I just haven't seen it. Go ahead, Chris.
So I would think that the problem with that is that you buy an instance. You buy an instance by the hour.
Mm-hmm.
You would have, but you're going to have a lot of media up there too. So
you can't give it up. So
yeah, which you don't want to let go of. So I guess
you could have an S3. You could have like an S3 that you had access to. You know, that's
yeah.
You know that it knows what to do with, so that you could probably spin it up and spin it down. But I think that,
but the S3 and the edit instance want to be very fast between each other.
Yeah,
and I don't know if you even know if they're in the same building.
I don't think that math adds up. Like I just don't think that it. I don't think it would pan out. Like I think you're better off.
Idea. Call us
an M1 Mac Mini would probably cost less than the first week of using it if you're editing full time. I mean, I think that's the issue. Go ahead, Bill.
I don't remember the name of it. Avid famously about 3 or 4 years ago had an initiative where they were trying to have a cloud service, and the Avid editors were going to keep their stuff, and it just faded away after some months. I think maybe some people are still using it, but it was never responsive enough to make a good editing system from every Avid editor that I ever talked to, and they immediately went back to their old workflow habits of keeping everything local, because that's how fast enough so you can think your way through an edit without all the latency.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Eddie Scott in Mission Viejo, California says the AKG P220 mic has a 20 dB attenuation switch on the body of the mic. When would it be appropriate to use this?
Go ahead, Chris.
I don't know what that mic is, but I'll tell you, an attenuation switch you're going to use someplace where it's really loud. If you think about what we're doing here, we're all sitting in a relatively quiet space. At the most, we have some computer fans or hard drives near us. And we've chosen to try and hit, I'm looking at the meter now, trying to hit -20. It's a little hard to get that much gain out of the human voice if you're not screaming and stuff. But you could be in a garage with loud cars, revving stuff, anything. If you're in a place where it's super loud, to get your gain stage right, the best thing that you can do is start with the attenuation at the mic so that you're actually giving a legitimate level to your mic pre's.
Yeah. Go ahead, Bill, real quick.
Yeah, they're building in we used to carry inline attenuators sometimes at 15, 25, and 35 dB reduction. And I can't tell you, I've used it a couple of times in drag racing and things like that where it was on 35 the whole time just to knock that sound down.
Yep. Next question.
Next one comes from Jesse Kester in Glendale. And Jesse says, any free solutions for delaying audio on your computer? We're feeding our video through Keynote and OBS before landing in Zoom and slipping sync about half a second or so when we land in Zoom.
Yeah, you can use audio delay it depends on what platform. I can tell you that on a Mac, you could use a delay inside of Audio Hijack. Would actually allow you to delay that audio. I'm not clear of what the PC side of it is. Go ahead, Tim.
I know you can delay audio in OBS as well. I'm not sure about anything else.
Chris?
I've heard people say that if you ran your audio through a long electrical cable, like say the light cable over Alex's, it's gone. You trust the cable? Oh, never mind.
I was wondering when you were going to notice. It's been there for days. I just want you to know. I did that. I just did that to test you to see how long you would.
I wouldn't have noticed, but Doug Ferguson sent me a message. He says, Alex dressed the cable. Fenwick wins.
It was like days ago, though. You lose because I did it like days ago, just wondering when you were going to notice, and you didn't even notice until someone told you. Anyway, next question.
Sorry to hurt your feelings.
Nate Smith is up next from Grand Rapids, Michigan. He says, I use ProPresenter 7 in a church setting, and I've reached the graphics limitation of the M1 Mac Mini. What machine do I buy that has more graphics horsepower? I'd love to stay with Mac, but I'd also love something I can throw in a rack.
Go ahead, Tim.
So you have to go with the M1 Pro Max. That'll support 4 screens natively. Otherwise, ProPresenter 7 does run pretty well on the Windows side as well. Again, if you get graphics cards that expand, you can do quite a few different screens and looks. and project those screens through like NDI or all kinds of things actually. So, but you do need some horsepower for that. I think your M1 graphically will handle it, but the M1 Mini only does really 2 screens well, I think.
I'm wondering whether if ProPresenter is native yet on the M1.
It is. Oh, on the M1, that's a good question.
I don't think it is. About that. I think because there's no. I have a hard time believing that if it was natively written to the M1, that the M1 would run out of graphics processing. If you had a 16 gig M1, 16 gig M1 with a native app, man, I'd love to see what your service looks like if you're running out of graphics on that computer. So with a native app, but yeah, it'd be interesting to see. Obviously, you can go up to bigger machines like yeah. And the other thing to look at is this could be theoretically a place where you could use a Intel Mac Mini with some kind of graphics card, outboard to run it as well, some kind of ATI
Absolutely,
card.
You could do that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Next question.
Next one comes from Jack B. in Phoenix, Arizona. What kind of mic do panelists recommend for shooting outdoor interviews with the Blackmagic Pocket Cam 6K?
Go ahead, Jesse.
We use the Rode NTG series mics, and as important as a microphone is making sure that it's just plopped as close as you can. So boom pole and C stand for something like that.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I was going to say there's 2 ways to do this, wirelessly and wired. Wired always will be more reliable. If you're using a dynamic mic, something like an RE20, which is you've seen in 100,000 news interviews, or the Bayer 58, which is the same kind of dynamic mic, they're kind of indestructible. That, an XLR cable, and the adapter for the Blackmagic 6K that takes XLR into the little mini pin is all you really need. If you're going with some kind of wireless system, you just want to make sure that you can adapt it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the main thing is and when you're out and about, when you're getting away from a lot of wireless systems work, because you're just not competing with a lot of other RF. So if you're not that far away, a lot of times when we're doing wireless, you're never more than 30, 40 feet away if we're out in the middle of nowhere. And most of my experience in this is in Africa. The shotgun is great. You have a lot of control over it if you have somebody that can operate it, or it's not, sometimes when it's on the camera, but generally not. If you have a boom operator, a shotgun, or if you're having someone not moving, you can actually place it on a C stand or even across a truck. We've done it with Defenders, where they have a rack on the top, and we'll run a pole across it with a shotgun sticking out of it, and then we just attach it to it, and someone walks underneath that, and it's worked pretty well. So the shotgun there, sometimes you don't want to see it. So then you're talking about DPAs or Countrymen's. And then you want to get kind of a mole skin that you can put around it so that you put it inside their collar. You can actually get some pretty good sound from that, as long as you don't hear the scratching. But you can kind of put it down and inside of what they're doing, or hide it, in a variety of places. We've even hid them in hats and stuff like that. So that's another way to kind of get that audio. And then, of course, if you don't mind seeing it, if it's an interview style, I have to admit that 99% of the time we just use SM58s with a mic plug. So like typically we've used ultrasonic mic plugs with SM58s, and they work pretty well. Next question.
Jesse Kessler's again here with from Glendale. What is the criteria and process for suggesting a guest for office hours?
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, usually there's a topic in Discord. You just put it in there and try to get support for it in that topic.
That's a good place to start, as far as that's the best place, as far as that. You can also contact me, and say, I have this person that does this thing. I'm very quickly working towards getting a team up together, and so we'll probably have that distributed away from me soon. But right now, most of the guests we have, someone pings me in Discord and says, I know this person that can do this thing. And then we figure out whether that makes sense or not. But the best way to get kind of groundswell, as Paul suggested, is to put it into the second hour and see if people are actually interested in that subject matter. Next question.
Next one's from Douglas Carmichael, and he says, a Reddit thread said that everyone's first tour should be on house-provided consoles and not carry consoles with them, so as to develop one's mixing skills. Any thoughts on that?
Go ahead, Jesse.
Oh, when the task ahead of you is colossal and there's seemingly infinite moving parts, I would do everything I could to stack the deck in my favor, and if that means bringing your own console along and having the XLR master out ready to go, I would do it, but I'd also be ready to work with house systems as well.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, just exactly what Jesse just said. I took the words right out of my mouth. I would, no matter what, I would bring your own console, even if you're using the house console. Have one for backup. Bring it with you.
Yeah, you create a lot of variables for the house when you do it, though. When you bring in, because usually if you bring in your own console and it's not like a Digico, or something really big, the house kind of rolls their eyes. They're just like, oof, like these people, because now they have to deal with a whole bunch of stems and a whole bunch of other things that they didn't have to deal with before, and they know that you don't know what you're doing because you have a console that's less than 10 grand. Like if you come in with a little console and say this is the way I'm going to run it for that, when you're talking about a tour, when you're talking about doing an individual event. Then it tends to be, we bring a lot of our own customized stuff because we're doing custom comms and custom things for the stream, and the house consoles aren't going to support what we're trying to do. But when you are doing a tour and you go into a well-established, venue, they usually have a pretty good mixer. And if you have something that's better, that's really good, that really provides something distinct, it makes it worth it. But bringing in your own Mackie because that's the only thing you know how to use, doesn't make you a lot of friends at the venue, because you're now creating a whole bunch of complexity for them that they didn't have before. Just that's the only thing to kind of keep in consideration. And that affects everything. Like the big thing is everyone thinks that everything's technical. Most of a tour and most of what you're doing is social, and so social engineering is like, just how hard they work to make sure that you get everything that you need before the show starts. That a 10 or 20% reduction means that you don't have everything you need, and they just do that because they think you're crazy, so you just have to be careful of that process. Next question.
Jonas Dettel in Stuttgart, Germany. On the Ultrastudio Mini, can you use HDMI and SDI separately from each other?
I think it only does one or the other. I don't think you can put two different feeds through it. I'm not 100% certain of that. But I don't think we've ever done it where we've had a different feed out of both. I think we can do the same feed out of both, but I think it only has one engine. But I'm not 100% certain. Next question.
Next one comes from Michael Sweeney in Belfast, Illinois. And Michael says, when it comes to fundraising, where in-person entertainment evenings, galas, were the status quo, how can you maintain participation with some, if any, benefactors in a hybrid or totally remote event?
Go ahead, Rupert.
I'm going to come at this from the totally remote angle, because we know hybrid's a bit of a challenge, but for fully remote, with these gala fundraising things, you can be dealing with some pretty big personalities normally, big characters and VIPs and whatnots if you're at that kind of level. If there are, folks out there, entertainment acts and people who are figuring this stuff out, and you may be able to engage an entertainer or somebody who has got a pretty good process for doing this and coming in with whatever their act, whether it's speaking or comedy or whatever it is, they're going to come in, even magicians and things like that. But make sure you seek out people who are doing a good job of that, because there's plenty of people out there who maybe not doing such a great job. I think obviously all the normal great digital first things go without saying. Great audio, everybody's got to be able to see and hear everybody clearly. If you're dealing with benefactors though, and they're going to be part of a digital event, they're going to be speaking, and you're asking them to donate, hopefully, substantial amounts of money, I would ensure they look and sound great, make them look good, and then they'll just feel good about it.
Jesse?
We do a lot of work with NPOs, and one of them is Little Tokyo Service Center. And for their recent fundraising, they went really far outside the box and created this entire virtual town. You'd walk around like it was a role-playing video game, and you could visit different booths. You could see the different performances at the different locations around the town. So for the fully non-hybrid, the fully interactive, what were they calling that? The remote events.
Or digital first, yeah.
Yeah, don't be afraid to think big, especially when you consider that they're saving a lot of money on venues and PA systems and stuff like that. They had this budget for the fundraisers. Now they were able to move that into developing some really creative solutions that got their communities really excited about what was going on with their business, with their NPO.
Yeah, one of the things that Jesse points out is that there's a lot of money that was being spent on something to have this event go on. And people have this thing like, I can now run this with 2 people. I can now run this for, like a tenth of or a hundredth of the infrastructure that I had before. What we've seen be really successful in this area is people taking that same budget and applying it to the event. So some of the things that we've seen for some of these, and the hybrids are a disaster. Hybrids are just bad for business because it means that people who come in online are going to have a bad experience and they're not going to come back. You are destroying your brand. Like you are the brand of when a hybrid event is poison, to people coming back again, because, and they won't complain about it. And they'll say, oh, that was a good event. But when push comes to shove and they don't have quite as much time, it's not a must see event anymore when it's hybrid. And so you just got to know that that's kind of what you're paying for. That's the price you're paying by doing hybrid. From a digital first perspective, the things that we've seen people do, gift packs, like little mail out gift packs, super valuable. like that is the thing, is sending. And Blue is one of the first people we did that. But we've had, like, for large events, Blue does a lot of that, Blue Melnick. But before that, we were doing like wine tastings. We sent everybody the wine and the cheese, and then they get to go to the winery and the cheese makers virtually and talk to them while they're talking to the people from their house. And it was like, and so those were some of the things that are just super cool. You got to stop thinking about how to reproduce the physical world, because the physical world is super limited. So it was super limited in its own way. And if you keep on trying to reproduce it, you're now having a fax of a bad image, And so the thing is that if you think about how to go past that, you can take people all over the world. You can take them to the winery. You can take them to all these places. You can send them a gift pack where they open it up and we had one event that we did where the price per person was $2,500. And with those people, they sent them a webcam and a mic, and a gift pack and a little thing of wine and some cheese and some things. And then now everybody looked good and everybody sounded good, and they had an incredible experience. Another thing to think about is what people do want to do is network. So being able to find ways that you can break people into breakout rooms of like 10 people so they can watch the main gala, but you're actually feeding that into every breakout room or every individual Zoom room so they can talk to each other while watching it, and that takes a lot. But if you have 20 tables, you have 20, and all of these things take infrastructure, but you had infrastructure before. When you were doing the gala, you had how many waiters and how many people that were running the AV and how many people that were greeting you and how many people, you take the same budget that you had before and you put it into people experiencing a digital experience, and they'll never go back. Like they'll never go back to showing up. I mean, there'll be a handful of people who are, you can't get over the process, but there'll be a whole new set of people. Just remember, every physical event eliminates 99.9999% of your addressable market. And so if you apply some of these things to it, you can grow it to be 10, 20 times bigger than it was before. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas, and he says, discuss ESPN's handling of the Alabama versus Georgia national championship game versus the NFL's playoff games.
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, this kind of grew out of a pre-show conversation Alex and I had the other day, and I'm going to show you what it looked like on ESPN. If I can change this, you see this. This is on a 55-inch TV. I snapped this picture with my cell phone from across the room. It's impossible to tell what's going on in the field, And then in the lower right-hand corner, you've got Jimbo Fisher, who's head coach at Texas A&M, doing commentary in a very droll kind of way that he would normally talk. He's not had any training as a sportscaster. And so if I had a 100-inch TV, maybe this would work,
The problem is that production for most football games, especially, if you go to the NFL, production for those football games is really good. And when you're at the stadium, it was good to be at the stadium, being around a bunch of other people, but the view of the game really is bad. Compared to what you're used to. I mean, you're competing with 50 cameras, 10 or 20 playback systems, graphics, data, and commentators, or you're sitting in the back with hot dogs. So the thing is that I think broadcasters just don't have their head around it. Like the new thing is like, let's be interactive, let people choose. And, the Mannings are doing this cool thing, but the Manning thing, if you watch it, it's a little rough. The thing is that the question is whether I think I would rather watch the game and then listen to smart people talk about it. I'd rather have a second ear experience where I can sit there and ask questions and be part of it and everything else, but not actually have, the watching part they figured out. And I think that I think giving people more things to look at, they're not going to pick the right things. And Verizon's been trying to do this for like a decade, and it didn't really work. Jeffrey.
Well, the Manning thing is stellar compared to the
compared, but it's still boring. Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
That's what I was going to say is ESPN has two channels, one that actually has the game, and then of course the one that has this multi-screen experience. And if you don't like one, you go to the other. It's simple as that.
No, but what you want is the commentary, but you don't want the video. This is an example of someone when all you have is a hammer, everything's a nail. They don't know how to do anything other than video, so they're going to do video. What I want as a Steeler fan is I just want to listen to the Steelers. I want to hear ex-Steelers talk about the game while I'm watching, and then the Green Bay folks can listen to Green Bay and they can da-da-da-da. But I don't want to watch. I want to watch the main game and listen to something different, and that's the distinction.
I get that. So with the Packers, it was always for a long time. It was always watch the Packers on TV, listen to it on the radio.
Yeah, that's what we grew up doing.
Yeah,
I grew up listening to Myron Cope. Call the Steeler game. The problem really was sync because they were calling the game. I don't need the people that I'm listening to call the game. I can have them call the game. I just need them to commentate, on it, because I'm not interested in listening to, as I said, we've talked about in the pre-show. If it's not Chris Collinsworth or Tony Romo, I just don't care what they're saying. They're just not very. I haven't heard anything else that was listenable. Next question.
The next one comes from Tim Holm in San Lorenzo, California, here on the panel. I get why you would buy a Blackmagic Design 6K, but I have a bunch of Micro Four Thirds lenses. What are the advantages and real-world use cases for the 4K Pocket versus the cinema camera?
Go ahead, Jesse.
It's one of those things where the answer's in the question. It's lenses. The 4K RAW can get you across the finish line. Go for the 4K, and also, where else are you going to get $1,000 anamorphics?
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, same thing. If you have the lenses, buy the camera that matches the box of lenses you already have. If I didn't have a bunch of Canon lenses, I wouldn't have bought a 6K.
Yeah. I mean, the 4Ks work great. The main reason that we use 6Ks is because I had a ton of Canon glass. Also because the depth of field is shorter and the low light is better. So there are reasons that the 6K is it gets better low light. You're gonna have shorter depth of field when you want it. And Canon glass is really easy to get. There's more variety in the Canon glass than there is in Micro Four Thirds. That said, I've done tons of stuff with Micro Four Thirds, and they're great cameras. I think some of the chips have gotten a little bit better. The chip in the cinema camera, the 4K cinema, is significantly better sensitivity than the micros or the studio cameras. Next question.
Next one comes from our friend Tony Mobley in Newnan, Georgia. He says, I was asked today about maybe adding color to my lighting. What are the panel's thoughts?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So I brought this up, and it wasn't about the lighting. So if I said that, unless somebody said something else, but what I said was your white balance was perfect. It matches perfectly. But the problem that I had was that there's no color in your background. It's very neutral colors. So adding a little bit of red, a little bit of a bright color in your background on your shelf, maybe a flower or something like that, would help pop things out a little bit.
Good, Paul.
Tony, good question. I just got these light bulb replacements for all the light bulbs in my house. And they're called Wyze, W-Y-Z-E, and they're just screw-in replacements. And you can, they come with an app that's remarkable. It's got a color wheel. You can pick which one. You can pick trying to get it so you can see that. It's got a color wheel and intensity. You can change everything.
Yeah.
And it's just a quick fix if you want to change like the color of a room,
Yeah.
Chris, are you sneering at me?
I think that the color, I think that the complementary colors could be really good. A lot of us use cooler colors just because it helps bring you back out. When your complexion is darker, the background being white is the hardest color white is the hardest thing to have behind you. So that's the biggest challenge. You manage it really well. I think you have the lighting working really well, but I think that that's always a challenge is you want that background. I always want the background to be a little darker, or just so that I have more range to fully expose the subject. And white doesn't give you that range, for anybody. The first thing that I do when someone's wearing a white shirt, I always ask, do you have blue or gray, or something just slightly darker than white. Pure white is the hardest thing to have in your background or as a clothing item because it limits what you can do from an exposure perspective. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Tim Holman, San Lorenzo, California. He says, what type of sound panel is both reasonably priced, looks good, and is effective? The room is 12 foot by 14 foot, and I want to treat 2 walls. Do other decorative surfaces exist, for example, plant walls and so forth?
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I have seen plant walls in some of the locations at work. Usually they'll put in like mosses or those succulent type plants that don't need a lot of watering. I'll dig them up. Hit you up in Discord or Mukana. Good stuff.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, John Idelson, he told me about these sound curtains that look pretty good. It's a green screen on one side and it's black on the other side. You can use it to hang on a wall or you can use it as a room divider. I wish I had the product name. I don't have that handy.
Good, Bill, real quick.
Really quickly. Cheap bookcases and go to a used bookstore and get a bunch of books. And that's one of the most effective, inexpensive sound diffusers you can find.
If it's not on camera, I have sound blankets all around me right now. so you can get relatively inexpensive 70 to 90 pound sound blankets, and they will absorb a lot of reflection. I am dying to build a plant wall as a sound diffuser. Like I saw it. Someone did a fake one in Monterey. I was visiting John. I'm dying to like build one that have all that oxygen and it would feel very fresh. You just have to figure out the water management. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Tony Mobley again in Noonan, Georgia. Has the panel done the iOS update for their devices? It was released yesterday.
I don't think I've done it yet. I definitely have learned not to put it on automatic. I usually like to see what happens on Twitter first to see if it like did it thump everybody's phone or are they all now doing something weird? So yeah, I usually wait a couple days. Next question.
Next one comes from Diego Nunez in Barcelona, Spain. I have to broadcast a Teams meeting to a Teams live event stream. In the past, I screen scraped one PC, the meeting attendee, using NDI and selected this as NDI's webcam source on a second PC, the live event producer. Any other better way to do this in Teams?
Go ahead, Rupert.
If you have access to the administrative settings in the Office 365 environment that you're working in, you can enable some back-end NDI inputs and outputs there. Other than that, they have some pretty extensive documentation on Microsoft for doing all this stuff. So I'll just drop some links in the chat.
Yeah, and we're going to bring some folks on from Microsoft Teams to talk about it, answer your questions. So I think we have a product manager we're talking to about that. So anyway, we'll stay tuned for that. We'll get a Q&A for you soon. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Jens in Sandpoint, Idaho. I've been asked to take house feeds and stream them to a private stream. What equipment would you bring to make sure that you get that video and audio out? Go
ahead, Rupert.
I would ideally like to know a little bit more whether you're going to be just taking a feed or doing some switching, how you're going to get those feeds, what it's going to be HDMI or SDI. So if you're going with as much information as you've given here, then I'd grab a bunch of equipment, to get take some kind of interface to take whatever audio they're going to give you, whether it's line or whatever, a little Behringer Flow 8 or something with plenty of inputs and outputs, and you can do some plumbing. A10 Mini, maybe if you've got to do some switching, and that'll hopefully take care of your stream, but you need to find out where you're going to be streaming to. I'll take a couple of laptops, plenty of Ethernet, and if you've got to provide your own connectivity, then PEP waves or routers or whatever you need to do to get internet, but make sure you get wired, find out where you're streaming to, and find out how you're going to be given the feeds.
And go ahead, Chris.
Adapters. I just bring a whole bunch of adapters.
Adapters.
I mean, if you don't know what you get adapters.
Yeah, decimators, audio embedders, and de-embedders. Those are the big things. Can I get audio and a delay unit? So you need something to delay the audio. You need something to embed or de-embed the audio in both. You want a decimator or two, and then you'll need an encoder. And so those are the things that I would probably take to make that possible. And of course, I would probably take like an elemental link that I just don't have to think about. It's like a little box, put it on, I can see it on the web and then send it wherever I need to send it. Next question.
Tony Mobley's up next again from Noonan, Georgia. As we are working to get better on conversations with Tony Mobley, we invite the community to comment on last night's show and the opportunity to learn the Mobley process.
I'm afraid that show sits in a time when I always have meetings. It's Wednesday, at 5, between 5 and 7. I'm always in meetings. I haven't seen it yet. How did it go, Tony?
So I think the show went very well. We had a few glitches with some of Greg's great graphics in 3D with OBS, and it may have been
Was it his OBS, his issue, or your issue?
I'm not really sure if it was OBS or the combination of OBS and Video Ninja all working together
on the same machine. That would be very.
I think that what was seen was good for those who are not office hour people.
Right.
I think that it was encouraging to teachers or other people who might be considering using Greg's method for adding content to education,
right,
or sharing some other type of platform. In all, I think it was a good show, but I'm a little bit hungry from the standpoint of wanting to get better. I am really wanting to get better. And I also want to encourage the community to consider participating in and learning this process as we are still continuing to do it. I'm a bit concerned because it's primarily just a few people now that are working on it. Right. And I just want to offer other people the opportunity. It's not a closed community. We need more help. And if you're interested in learning this process, please consider helping out.
Yeah, there's no other better way to either meet people or to learn how to do something than to do it. And that's the big thing, is that the best way to know whether people are worth working with or even just making friends, in my opinion, is to do stuff with them. And so doing things with folks on the Mobley process or the Belfast method, all of those things are huge opportunities to kind of learn and meet a lot of other people and really figure something out where it's relatively safe to figure it out, as opposed to trying to do it in your first production. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas. He says, American Express Global Business Travel, GPT, a company Zoom invested in last month, does seem to have virtual events offering. Thoughts from the panel? And he's got a link there to it.
What are your thoughts, Rupert? I haven't really
absorbed
that.
The American Express have a big business travel segment, and in December sometime there, they raised some investment and took that part of their business public as a separate entity, GBT, I think, there. And I think they're trying to pivot maybe a little bit into offering their clientele, which would otherwise be business travelers, a format and an offering there for virtual events and hybrid events and things like that. And it just appears that Zoom saw an opportunity there also, and made some investment around the same time as all the liminal things. But the literature that the American Express have on their site, says all the good things that we'd like to hear about virtual events. Need to be engaging and all those things. So they have the language they use on their site is pretty good. It's just going to be interesting to see how that gets blended with Zoom's involvement.
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, it's got the usual fluff stuff on their website, and the idea is, I think they want to disperse real, actual meetings, physical meetings, and connect those meetings together. To make a sort of a third hybrid model. You've got your pure virtual meeting, you've got your pure real meeting in real time, and then you've got a hybrid between those two, I think.
Yeah, and that won't work. Like, not only from my own experience over the last 10 years, but now watching everybody do it, I have not seen anybody pull that off except for the NFL. I mean, that's a big hybrid event, but but we have to remember that, people say, well, what about football? Like, that's the number one thing that people say when I say hybrid events don't work. They go, well, what about football? And I said, well, every one of those games, if you count all the salaries that are included, it's like a $50 million production every single time. So if you have $50 million, you can make it super compelling. I will definitely agree with you. But if you have less than $50 million, it probably is not going to work as well. Go ahead, Rupert.
They also mentioned something similar to, I think, the sort of hub and spoke model, where they're suggesting, a greater number of smaller events, smaller gatherings, and linking those people up. I think we saw Slack do something like that recently. So I wonder whether that's a model that's going to be pursued.
Yeah. Next question.
Next one comes from Henry Ramos in Yonkers, New York. He says, suggestions for inexpensive, lav mics for the Rode Wireless Go 2.
Go ahead, David.
I actually have the first gen Go wireless, and I bought the Rode lav for like $80. Godox makes one. It's like an Omni TRS 3.5 mil for $20, I think, at B&H. So.
Yeah. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, some of the capsule makers offer their lav capsules with that 3.5 millimeter. Do be a little bit careful, because anything that says for Sennheiser will have that little locking screw collar on there, and those tend not to work with not matching units on the mic. So if you're just looking for 3.5 millimeter connector, make sure it doesn't have that little locking collet on it, because that'll make it not work with your system.
Yeah. Next question.
Albie in San Antonio says, Alex mentioned about scratching from a lav. Is there a way to salvage that audio for a last resort?
Oh, it's so hard, because the problem is the data's not there. Like when it's scratching, there's definitely tools. So RX, the Isotope RX series has some things that will reduce some of that and make some calculations. The reality is that there's some AI models that are starting to get kind of applied to that, but a lot of them haven't made it to, I haven't seen them make it to a wide product, but I've definitely seen proof of concepts where I know like the AI model I know what you sound like, I know what that word sounds like, and I can fill in the parts of the scratching, and that's what's coming. But I haven't seen it in a publicly available model where it can remove the scratching basically in post. It won't do it live yet, but if you let it sit there and churn on it, it will figure out a model. And especially if you let it have a lot of time with that person, the AI starts to figure out like how to replace their words with other words, especially ones that they've already said before. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I'm just going to double support what Alex just said. One of the issues is that most inexpensive wireless systems, if that's the source of the lav signal, have compander circuits built into them that really do take the loudest noise and bring it down. And if you have scratching that is loud, that is literally going to kill the recording of the speech formants and the processes that you're recording. So there will be nothing there underneath it. If you can use wired lavs instead of that do not have those compander circuits in there, sometimes you can still get at least a little bit of the original vocal signal underneath the scratching sounds, but it is a nightmare regardless. And good mic technique is always going to be your best bet. Monitor.
The big thing is it's generally better to bring those spikes down. What happens is when they're scratching is they're a lot louder than the voice, or they can be. And so getting them down below the voice, at least where you can hear them hitting or you can hear them doing it, you're better off with no audio than a really loud hit. So think about that as well. And that's what a lot of the scratch reducers will do as part of the filtering. Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer's up next from Vieira, Florida. He says, can you suggest a good source for free stock footage using it for a nonprofit? Thanks.
Go ahead, Chris.
Anybody who's spent a lot of time looking at stock footage will tell you two things. There's a scale. And the scale is cinematic on one end and cheese on the other end. And typically the more you pay, the more toward the cinematic end you'll get. That being said, just the other night I was working with Keenan, and he had signed up for the Vimeo Pro video producer service, something like that. It's about $20 a month, but it has this huge trove of stock footage. And I gotta say, some of it was really nice, like really nice. Like, oh, I'd love to use that shot. However, you can only use it inside their editor, which is it's like iMovie 12 years ago. That being said, you could make a bunch of one-shot movies and export them all. I'm not saying we didn't do that, but it's pretty interesting. It's worth looking at, the Vimeo Pro site.
Hey, go ahead, Paul.
I tried to show a clip, but for some reason it froze. But anyway, Shutterstock is pretty good. They have some free and some for pay. And they always have a huge booth at South by Southwest, and I've visited with those guys. They're for real, and they have a good collection.
Yeah, I mean, when you're looking for free, as I said, we don't use a lot of that in what we do much anymore. I mean, free for me usually means I go out and shoot it, like with an iPhone. You know, a lot of times I can shoot something that's more reliable for what I need, you know, even with an iPhone, to just put something in as an example than buy something that looks a little cheesy. The ones that are less expensive that you can sometimes find good stuff on is ArtGrid. Has a lot of options, and I don't think it's not free, but it's like $700 a year or something like that. And you have stuff that's in log and Apple ProRes, and you know, it's really high quality stuff that you can use. So, and some of it's 4K and 8K. And so ArtGrid is one, Pond 5 is another that has a lot of really inexpensive videos that you can use. But you just want to take a look at the time it takes to do it. All right, next question.
Next question coming in from Tim Holm in San Lorenzo. He says, I noticed that Zoom often seems to crush the blacks and is more contrasty than what I'm feeding it. For Office 2.0, do we need to feed in a flatter curve? Also, what starting point is good, like 709 Cinelike V?
Go ahead, David.
I'm not sure what we're shooting for Office Hours 2.0, but at work, we have the debate between Roland switchers, Blackmagic switchers, and when feeding Macs into them for playback. We found that the SMTP RP 431-2-207 DCI P3 profile on a Mac brings it to a similar kind of gamma or whatever it may be. So that might be a starting place for that, but I'll let Alex probably speak on what we're looking for the cameras.
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm trying to figure out is how to correct for all these cameras. And one of the things that I'm playing with is the idea of taking a simple chart, you know, might be one of the little X-Rite charts or whatever, and kind of setting what the level should be, and then having us make adjustments to it in both out of a computer. Like out of a computer, this is the blacks and this is the whites, and let's take a look at what that means. And out of a camera, to set the camera. So I'm trying to think of calibration methods where we stop trying to say, well, I just set it this way and it's not working, and more we have to figure out a way to tune it to where it needs to go. And I think that you're absolutely right that it crushes the blacks, but I bring my blacks up a little bit to kind of correct for that. But it doesn't crush them that much. I think a lot of people, when they say they crush them, like your example right now, yours is pretty crushed, you know, regardless, you know, just dark, you know. And so you want to, so some of it's crushed and some of it is just, you know, the lighting there. Yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. This is the whole thing about quantifying aesthetics. This is one of my favorite things that I always keep coming back to. Yeah. And you, Mr. Lindsay, are going to have to come up with a standard to quantify the aesthetics of, you know, where do you want us to set white? Where do you want us to set black? Where do you want to set it flesh?
Right. And we're doing pretty well. I mean, obviously we're the best thing I've ever seen on Zoom, you know, on any given day. But
yeah, but it took us 660 times to get here.
Exactly. Well, and again, I think that this gets back into, my goal is always that we're going to figure out, to your point, we're going to figure out the standards so that we can publish them and we can use them in our own events, where we send as part of the kit. Like one of the things we do now when we send out record units is that we send people with a little X-Rite chart and they can open it up and just for a minute, just so I've got some data, of what things look like. And so those are the kind of things that we, figuring out a way to systematize it will definitely improve people's events over time. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, so I'm actually feeding Rex or like 709, and on my previews, all of my previews, they look great, but it's obviously crushed on Zoom. And you're right, I do have a little bit of too much contrasty light. I know that, but it's dramatically different from what I'm previewing on multiple screens.
Are you on a Mac or PC?
PC is what this is coming through right now.
We have noticed that I have noticed that the blacks are crushed a little harder going through the PC for some reason than it is for the Mac. I don't have a reason for that. But to Zoom, when an A10 Mini is going through a PC, it is more crushed than a Mac, and I don't, not by a lot, but it's like we measured it, so it's different. So and I don't have a solution for why that is the case. Next question.
Next one comes from Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, not Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Both my HDMI Quad View and HDMI Matrix have an RS-232 port for serial control. The model links are in Mukana. I have not found any documentation to identify the requisite controls. Is there something published as a standard or reverse engineering technique they could use to get that data?
Go ahead, John.
Josh, why are you torturing yourself? You're bringing me back to the mid-'80s. We have to figure out whether those devices are DTE or DCE, and then there's multiple different pin configurations, whether or not we're using X on or X off or request to send, clear to send, because the cabling pinouts will be completely different. Looks like they're using an RJ45. And do you even have a computer that has a DB9 or a DB25 on it? But I'm happy to help you in after hours with all this. I used to do this for a living.
And I have to admit that as a kid with this, I would have the 232 pin out and wires just hanging out. And then I just attach them all to leads. Then I start, I didn't have any documentation at all. Back then, it's not like you could go download the documentation. I'd have a device that isn't working, and I would just sit there and just start applying, nominal electric loads to the, to the system until things started happening. And then I slowly mapped it out, and it would take
or the magic smoke puffed out.
That's right. What I said, nominal voltage, the voltage that was within the 232 spec. And, but applying that allowed me, and basically I mapped it out. It took me a couple hours. Like it would take me a couple hours to map almost every function out of a device to make it work. So you can just kind of, that's the brute force approach to figuring it out. I didn't break anything. There's a lot of things I did that broke things. That was not one of them. Next question.
Let's see what red and green do on 3 and 6.
Yeah, exactly.
Nate Smith in Grand Rapids, Michigan says, follow up on the ProPresenter question. I'm currently mapping 4 1080p feeds into one 4K output from the Mac Mini, then splitting that back out to 4 SDIs with an AJA box. Am I going to get better results, less GPU tax with the Blackmagic Design deck link setup?
Yeah, you are. Like you will stacking 1080p into 4K it's still going to cause convolution kernels. You're definitely, that's way harder than using the BMD. So if you have a BMD with 4 outputs, you're gonna do better. Or I think you can get 4 outputs with those little the little boxes that Chris Fenwick uses, right? You can get 4 outputs out of a Mac Mini from there, right? 1080p.
Some people do. It's not reliable.
Okay, there you go.
To get 4 1080p's, but you can get 4 1080p's reliably via NDI if you have the ability to go NDI, as reliable as NDI is. I know you not a big fan, but the most robust way is what you do.
Yeah, and I haven't. I will say that I haven't done anything other than recently. Haven't done anything other than ISO, and it takes like 20% of the computer's hardware. I mean, 20% of the overhead, to push out 4 1080p streams. So if the system can see them, I think that if you get a Sonnet box and you get a card that has 4 outputs, and then you can identify each output from there, I think you're going to find that you're going to get the machine will be barely working, at that point to do that. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
For the M1s, and the pluggable devices, I've been able to do 1080p as I bring it into the mini ISO, and I've been monitoring that. The only time that I have to have a problem is
4 1080p.
4 4 1080ps, yeah. And then there's a fifth monitor that can be variable.
Yeah. But if I was going to do it in a event perspective, I'd probably get the Sonnet box and the 1080p and a card. Next question.
It looks like Albie in San Antonio says, anyone have experience with fitness training classes that want to move to live streaming? What equipment would be the basics to start them off and build up in the future?
Go ahead, Jesse.
If you're just dipping your toes in the icy waters of live streaming, I would highly recommend being connected via Ethernet, not relying on wireless to stream. You're definitely going to want a wireless microphone for your instructor, but you're also going to want to consider piping their music through a mixing board. So you get their vocals into the mixing board, get the music, because that's such an important component of like physical fitness instruction. And also be careful about what platform you're broadcasting on, because if you're broadcasting copyrighted music along with the instructor's speech, you might get flagged, you might get taken down, you might get muted immediately. So be careful of all those factors.
You go, Rupert.
Exactly on those points. I'm reading it. I know it says live streaming, but I wonder whether it's more of a class format that's being asked about, an interactive thing, over something like Zoom. So you're having an interactive session rather than just a one-way stream. If that is the case, then your return audio is going to be important too. You want to get on a wireless receiver to some, headset or earphones or something like that. If you in a classroom environment, it would be great if you could get the computer and stuff set up and left in position, so you don't have to collapse and set that up each time. If you can get something set up, it's one of the cases where I will recommend a wireless keyboard and mouse, so you can step away from your rig onto your your area and still control your system. If you can get your system up on a big screen, that's even better. Stepping a few feet away from a laptop is going to be problematic. So if you can get a nice big screen, until you're getting into the multi-camera kind of route, then at least one good webcam like a Brio.
Mm-hmm.
Moving down later down the line, you could maybe look at something like the Facebook Portal TV that does the pan and scan thing. That might follow you around, might be quite nice. Take some examples though. Look around the On Zoom platform. That was really popular, during lockdown for instructors and yoga and things like that. And there's a lot of people still on that platform, and it can act as a bit of a directory to find different instructors, different classes, and different people already doing this. If you look around there and look at some of those sessions that are being offered, you'll get a sense of what is enjoyable and what isn't.
Go ahead, Jeffrey, real quick.
So when I was at CES, I saw this from Samsung. It is the Airline XD. It is a USB wireless that you can plug into your computer. And the cool thing about this is they also have an adjoining console that you can plug in. You can actually plug in the USB into the mixer and then bring in other microphones, other sound sources. That's $199, comes out next month, and then $159 for the amp. And so that would work really well.
Go ahead, Bill, real quick.
I know you're not going to be competing with them, but I would spend some time watching what they're doing in Apple Fitness Plus, because they're spending a gazillion dollars to build out this massive online exercise thing. And some of the things have really surprised me, some of the content that I've seen, because it's not traditional, but it's, I think, brilliant.
My sister-in-law does yoga online, and she has a Samson mic, a little $15, $20 Samson mic going into a Rode Go wireless, and that goes to a laptop. I think she's got an external, she's got a couple China balls and a external Brio, I think. Having an external camera also means you can put it somewhere that's specific. And so I think that's been very successul, just lightweight. She has an open speaker. She does have to walk up to it when she wants to do it. I think that when you want to get more advanced, I think you really want to look at things like Isadora, which we talk about in the afternoons, as well as Zoom OSC, where you could set up things where the instructor could hit things or do things that would just, give them a way to make changes as needed. Next question.
Steve Bodner in Colorado Springs is up next. He says, for recording panel discussions in hotel conference rooms with no rigging, are Source 4s in the back of room the best lighting option?
Unfortunately, probably. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, okay, so PAR Source 4 focusing their ellipsoidal lights, actually, the typical one. Source 4 makes a lot of stuff, but it throws light a long way. That light tends to be very harsh edged. It's hard to diffuse them. I would prefer in those circumstances, if you want a little softer thing, see if you can find a focusable Fresnel that's big enough to throw the same distance, because those Source 4s are great for gobos and stuff like that, but they're not the most flattering things. It wouldn't be my first choice for a back of the room light up for somebody on stage.
I really, because of COVID, we had the opportunity to test a lot of things, and I love putting people in a studio and then projecting them in front of an audience, even creating a two-way communication, because they look great, they stream great, they sound great, and you have a record of it that really works. And then the audience has just the same level of interactivity they had before. I mean, it's not hard to set that up. Next question.
Let's see. Oliver Horold in Lyman, Germany says the ATEM Mini Stream Bridge only accepts streams from Blackmagic devices. Is there a way to make it accept any video stream?
Nope. It is definitely a closed system. And other than converting it, putting it out into something like a Raspberry Pi or something else that's going to convert it, there's no other way to make it work. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is up next. What are the best practices for online communities that mix adults and minors? Would segmenting the community into adults only and minor only sections with dedicated vetted staff to police both sections be the safest?
It's so complicated. Like I don't have a good answer for that. It's just a really complicated problem. Next question.
Next question, moving on. Stefan Fischer in Würzburg, Germany says, what audio devices has an AES coaxial output? Some monitor speakers use this as a digital input interface, and I wonder which source is used.
I just have to admit that I've done a lot of things, and AES over coax is not something that, it's not one of them. It's just not a thing that we... Yeah, it's not something I've done. And it seems like we've stumped everybody. So at least you didn't hit somebody that hit a group that knows that answer. Sorry about that. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, I own a Windows 10 for workstations license. Is there a cost-effective way to upgrade to Windows 11 for workstations? Would Windows 11 require using a Microsoft account?
I'll go with Jeffrey.
So Windows 11, if you have Windows 10 and you have the right hardware inside the machine, the Windows 11 upgrade for workstations should absolutely be free. But if you want to do anything like clean or bring it onto another machine, look at OEMs rather than getting the regular retail box. An OEM will cost less than that, and you can get them in different spots for relatively lower prices.
Next question.
This one from Jesse Kessler in Glendale. He says, we've been hiring recently and received our first resumes written entirely in third person. Actually, we've received several. Is this a new trend, an odd coincidence, perhaps a deeper conspiracy that goes all the way to the top?
Go ahead, Chris.
I go with the conspiracy, Jesse. I'd be curious, is there any commonality between them? Do they come from like the same university, the same job area? That is a really curious observation. And I'd love to know what the answer is.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's connected to somewhere between the Masons, the Illuminati, and the CIA. I think that's all. It's all coming together now. I think we can see the end game now.
Paul Wallace probably has the answer. I think he's a spook.
Exactly. Rupert.
I remember way back when one used to deal with like recruiters or going through an agency, they would have you write your resume in that way because that's the way they're going to present it to their client. So it would be written in the third person.
Yeah. I just haven't. It's funny. I don't use resumes very often, so I don't know very much about. I don't hire people based on resumes, and I have the only time I provide a resume is after I've already gotten the job and I have to submit a CV for some kind of certification or something like that of the event. So it's just not an area I know very well. Go ahead, Bill.
Why do I think that there's somebody doing seminars up at the top of the corporate heap going, we've discovered this new thing, resumes written in third party.
It could be.
We'll get 2% more response.
You know, what I will say from the conspiracy theory is that there is a lot of work going on right now in coaching that we've seen around manipulating computers, because so in large corporations, people don't see anything until it's gone through the computer. The computer has a bunch of search terms, it's looking for a bunch of search items, it looks at a bunch of things, and they may have found a way to manipulate the system by not saying I often. That might be something that passes that basically passes through corporate filtering. I mean, because everything about your resume now is corporate filtering. It's like if you're applying to Apple, or Google or someone big, they're going to push it through a system, and the recruiters will never see it. If, for instance, most of those organizations, they've started to lean out of this. But if you didn't show a college education for a lot of these, they just never even saw it. they didn't, and if it wasn't a certain thing wasn't current, they'll say we need all Cisco. This might be like we need them all Cisco certified or whatever, or AWS certified or whatever. And you put your resume in, they don't even, because they're dealing with so many resumes, they just, they are throwing, good people out with that. But the problem is they're just fishing through so much of it that they can't go through it. Go ahead, Chris.
I like that theory that it's some sort of a let's hack the filter. And also, surprised. Jesse, keep in mind, those strange resumes are the ones that we're sitting here talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Next question.
Tony Moley, Noonan, Georgia, says, I think my lighting and 10S Max iPhone have made improvements in my looks. PR40, loopback, auto hijack, zoom, H6 makes great audio. Where should I push towards? I want to continue to improve. Any suggestions?
I go, Jeffrey.
Two things. One is soundproofing, adding some soundproof into the room, because that's a pretty bouncy room you're in. But the other thing is the 10S is probably the not, I don't want to say weak, but the one thing that you might want to think about changing to an actual physical camera.
I don't know. I mean, I think the 10S, until you start spending real money, the 10S still looks better than every webcam that I've seen so far.
I agree.
I think that I would think about something other than white as a background. I think that I would take that PR40 and move it to the side a little bit, because I can hear pops. I can hear some plosives when you're doing it. So yeah, it kind of wants to be at the side and pointed towards your mouth. Yeah, a little bit more like that. It also gives you a better frame. But it will, if you talk across the front of it a little bit with it pointing straight at you, you'll still get the same vocal hit, but you won't get the plosives, which is a little bit more problematic. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, Tony, I've seen enough of your house, incidentally, over the last couple of years. You have a very beautiful home, and I know that you're using a portion of one of your rooms. But I'm wondering, would it be possible to set up some sort of a curtain that could wrap around the front of you, outside of your lights, to kind of shelter yourself from some of that distant conversation that we hear on occasion, and maybe tighten up the audio space just a little?
And then
just an idea.
The harder thing is it would be great to have you further away from your background. Like it would just to let it drop out of focus a little bit. And that gets back to what Jeffrey was talking about, having a camera with a shorter depth of field. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I think Gudrun showed something early on, and it was like an IKEA room divider style thing to what Chris was, and that might work pretty well.
Yeah. Jeffrey?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. On room divider, you can get it at any, I was going to say Pier 1, but they're now gone. Any store like that. And then you can get some cloth from like Michael's or something like that, and then go from there. I used to go to the surplus stores and find those big old room dividers that they'd have for cubicles, because they'd be standing on their own. I had a bunch of them a long time ago. I got rid of them when I moved, but I wish I still had them in some points, because you could just put them right there, and they'd block sound left and right. It was awesome.
Next question.
Next one comes from Dave Oden in Johnstown, Colorado. And Dave says, is there a good way to color correct when your cameras are 2 Ursa Mini broadcast and 3 Canon CR N500 pan tilt zooms? What controller and what monitor and routing should he use?
So one of the things you can do is there's a variety of the mini converters that Blackmagic makes that now will handle LUTs. So what you can do is you can load those LUTs directly into there, and then you can use color correction. You can color correct all the cameras to each other. This is where this Davinci Resolve thing that we've done in the past really becomes useful. which is that you capture a color card, like an X-Rite card, I think they call it a Calibrite card now. I think they've changed the name of it or whatever. But you get one of the cards. You got to make sure that it's one of the ones that matches with Resolve. You then create a LUT inside of Resolve. You then load it into those mini converters and into the URSAs. That way, all of them are on the same. You're correcting all of them to the same look. And you can actually get them pretty close through a LUT control. That's probably the best way to get them close. Next question.
Henry Ramos in Yonkers, New York says, for 3.5 millimeter earphones, looking to get program in one ear and comms, Discord, or the phone in the other, any hardware suggestions?
Go ahead, Rupert.
I do like to do this kind of thing in hardware. You can mess around and try and do it in software with hijack and VB cables and stuff like that. But if you've got a 3.5 mil TRS plug, I like to break that out into two separate jacks and then have two separate interfaces out on my computer. I'll add a USB sound device and plug that in so I can have a device dedicated to Discord, and then that comes down one channel. You just need to watch out though that if you're getting a stereo signal from any of those platforms, you'll need to either decide which you're going to take left or right, or collapse it into mono first and then feed it up into one ear.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, just to help, any mixer that has pan controls on each channel strip should be able to allow you to put, if you can feed the left signal that you want on the left and pan it hard left, and then feed the other one and pan it hard right, that should split it up for the two ears for you.
Yeah. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, would a supercardioid mic like the DPA 2028, and he's got a link there, on an ARM or desktop stand be useful for communication and office hours instead of the Earthworks Icon Pro or Ethos? And he knows Rupert uses the Behringer XM8500.
Supercardioids, when you're sitting at a location, can work, but they are generally super sensitive because they're cardioid, and it doesn't take very much movement for you to drop out of their signal. So it's not something that I would choose by choice. I think that it's good in an environment where you're doing a handheld interview and you need to cut away all your background noise. And even then, I probably would be more likely to still lean back to something like an SM58 or some kind of dynamic mic over a supercardioid. You get a lot of sibilance in those supercardioids, and they're just very hard to control and get it right. Go ahead, Bill, real quick.
Yeah, real quick. Just also be sure, a lot of the mics that are really tight pattern out the front also have a low bar thing out of the back. That means that somebody sitting directly behind them can do. Shotguns are particularly noted for this. So just be careful. If you can find the pattern for your mic, look at it and make sure that there are nulls where you need nulls.
And for our producers, this is a good place for you to add more questions. If you have a couple of them lingering around, we're going to probably end a little early if we don't have more questions. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Douglas Carmichael. He says, currently I have my Windows 10 installation in a VMware VM. Would there be any way I can download the Windows 11 for Workstations ISO image to build a separate VM with Windows 11? Would I be forced to use a Microsoft account for that?
Go ahead, Rupert.
I'm going to take a stab at this. I just haven't done enough with the Windows 11, but I mean, the way it worked with the Windows 10 was you could download the ISO, you could spin that up in a VM just fine, but you would, if you're doing a VM, you would need a license key to enter at installation. If you were installing on a physical machine, some of those newer OEM machines will have a license 10 key burned into the platform, so it'll detect that. Or if you are online, it would validate your license if you already authenticated on that machine. But in a VM, trying to do it offline, I believe you would need a license key.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Actually, you don't need a license key. It'll work as an unregistered account, and then you'd have like a little watermark on the bottom corner. Enterprise people do this all the time. Same thing with Windows 10 and so you'd be able to load it up, and then maybe after 30 days you might get a, hey, would you like to register? But that's pretty much it.
I don't think you can get updates, right? If it's unregistered, you can't get patches.
No, you can, because they use this for VMs so they can actually do corrections and test things. So you should be able to get updates for that.
Next question.
Next one comes from John Snyder in Reno, Nevada. He says, what has your attention this week? What are you working on that excites you?
I guess for me, I am I've given up on. It's going to take me a little more time and money to build up my studio the way I want it, and I don't want to go through the trouble if I'm not going to do it all the way. So I'm saving up a little bit more money before I do that. And so as a result, I've decided to partially tear my studio apart. So I finally last night my big thing was I got my little drawing thing working again, because I had to put a bunch of stuff back together and move things around, and so I got that working. And I'm going to be kind of spending the next couple of days kind of rebuilding it. I have a whole bunch of presentations starting next week, so I have to have all the tools working the way they're supposed to. So I'm kind of working through that. Now go ahead, Rupert.
Yeah, we talk about workload from time to time. I have 4 sort of big calendar events next week, so I'm just taking the time just to not overload and just try and coast through there and get to next week with a full tank.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
For me, it's CES editing week, so I had about 25, 30 videos that I created from the event, and they're going to be going up on my sites and everything like that. And it's a little tougher because I don't do it like a lot of other YouTubers, because they just do the YouTube. I do the blog post and everything like that. So it's enough content for the next month for me, and that's this is the hard part, just getting it all edited and up.
Yep, Jesse.
Oh, I've been having a blast with the beginners courses for Swift programming.
I'm super. Now, what beginner courses are you taking?
Coding with Chris.
I am too. Like that's he does a really good job, I think, of walking you through stuff. So
he's such a nice boy, the kind you just want to take home to meet your family.
Go ahead, John.
So the OH Space project continues. We got our flight patches this week, and so we're excited about our flight patches, and the project's on schedule, and the rocket is on schedule, the construction of the rocket. So all is going well with the project.
That's awesome.
That is awesome. That's great.
Can't wait to see it. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana is up next. He said, I had to scramble the other day to do a tech check for a client, was trapped away from the office due to an interstate fire. What do freelancers among us carry when traveling just in case?
MiFis. Like that. I think that's the number. A MiFi. I usually have a couple phones, and those phones can do hotspots, and they're on different. So I have one on Verizon and one on AT&T. You don't need to bother with T-Mobile, but those two I always have two if I'm going to a site, and they both have hotspotting, so that I can at least do that, or a MiFi, so I don't tie the phone up. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, having lived in Arizona most of my life, where most drives to some place were 7-8 hours, I never leave without energy bars and water. You never know. I ran into a blizzard once in Palm Springs outside of them, and it's just always in there for 5 hours.
It's funny. It's funny that you say that. I never go on a road trip where I don't have enough food to comfortably do. I may not use it, but I will always have enough energy bars, fruit, nuts. That jerky. I love jerky while I'm driving. Well, biltong specifically. But I will always have enough that I can comfortably do the trip. But I never have it, except for the fruit and so on and so forth. I never have, and I prefer like fruit, nuts, jerky are the 3 things that I prefer. I've kind of gotten away from energy bars. Like I've become very sensitive to the processing. So just the taste of it and everything else. And so, but I always have that, because I'm always, that way I don't have to feel like if you get in a traffic jam, you don't have enough time, the place is weird, or so on and so forth. You just can keep going. Go ahead, Rupert.
I'm in the car and traveling with gear, then inverters. I'll always travel with like 2 or 3 inverters to charge stuff up, plug stuff in, do some rig, whatever. An
inverter that goes from your an inverter that goes from your what used to be, I guess it's now what do they call it? The utility
accessory socket or something like that.
Yeah, something accessory socket. It used to be for the lighter, but now it's an accessory socket because no one uses lighters. The other one though, but that I used to have in my van all the time was you can get an inverter that hooks straight to your car, to your battery, and having one of those around is super useful at times, and you don't use it. You won't use it while you're driving, obviously, but if you're parked over somewhere and you need real power, you can turn the engine on and have it there, and you can get a lot of wattage if you need it. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, my new truck has an inverter built into it. There's 3. There's a socket in the front seat. There's a socket in the back seat. And there's a socket in the bed. It's super cool.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Also, this might be off topic, but I just bought this little Husky air compressor. And you know what a pain it is to fill up your tires, like the thing in the meter, in the gauge. This thing, you plug it into the lighter, it snaps onto the stem. You dial in the PSI you want, you press a button and you walk away.
Yeah.
Goes, stops. It's really cool.
I had a car with a slow leak that I just, it was hard to figure out exactly what was going on. And I got one of those and it was life-changing. Like I was like, how did I not own this my entire life, is to be able to just top off my tires. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Depending on what you're doing, the one thing that I've done is I've found, I went around to the different coffee shops and I've basically just asked them, what are you guys using on your Wi-Fi, and maybe even do some tests myself. And then that way, if there's ever a situation where I have to vacate the office or not get to the office, at least I have that backup area that I know is going to be a little bit more secure. And then of course, that depends on what you're going to be doing overall.
What's funny is that I've learned that I now, after all the traveling that I've done, there's somewhere in my lower brain that literally tracks Starbucks. Like I can tell you where every Starbucks is all the time. Like in a town, anywhere I've driven through, I can tell you where the Starbucks is. The Starbucks here, Starbucks here, Starbucks here. Now, partially because it delivers coffee, but it also delivers Wi-Fi. And I have walked outside at night. The weirdest one was I think I was in Amsterdam or something, like standing outside a Starbucks in the middle of the night trying to upload a file, and it just, but you just know that this is a place that I can, it's a place that has Wi-Fi, and except for the Starbucks in Germany, in case you're wondering, at night after they close, they turn off their Wi-Fi. I think that's some kind of German thing and it makes me crazy. Next question.
Junior Grant is up next from New York, and he says, can I get a good audio signal to the ATEM from an HDMI splitter connected to an M1 Mac Mini?
Go ahead, Chris.
I didn't, you know what? I will admit, Junior, I didn't see the splitter, but you can absolutely get audio from the HDMI into the ATEM. What you need to do is you need to set, it'll be called like HDMI or Blackmagic HDMI or something as your audio output. You have to do that on the Mac.
Next question.
Tim McCulloch in Wichita, Kansas, U.S. says, are physical security devices like Google's Titan security key useful in a production environment?
Go ahead, Rupert.
I think I misunderstood the question, but I would choose other things as well.
Yeah, the Google one is actually pretty well tried because I think all the employees have it. What it does is it lets you keep your passwords and everything else. You pull that out, and nothing's going to work. So when you pull that out, it really nothing that you have to log into is going to log in anything that supports that device. I think the Google one is probably one of the widest used, and so it as a handshake. I don't know of the other ones because that's the only one that I'm familiar with. It is really useful in the sense that you can walk away. Now, I admit that if I have a computer, all of our computers in production either have no information or all the information. So like my Presenter Pro machine or something like that is all going to have nothing on it. Like it can stay open all the time. I don't care. It doesn't have someone's Apple ID. It doesn't have things there and everything else, so that you can leave it open as a production unit. The ones that I'm checking email or have any files on it or client, stuff like that, I just shut it all the time. So I have it lock when you shut, and then I have a very long password that takes to get in or biometric to get back into it. And that's kind of how I secure stuff, probably more often than using a key. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Douglas Carmichael. Has anyone had experience with Notch? He's got a link there for real-time visual effects. Seems like it has an Isadora-like node-based workflow.
I have not seen Notch. Maybe I have. I just don't remember it. I'm just taking I think that I'll have to check it out. In a visual effects world, there's a lot of compositors and visual effects. Nodes like Isadora are very common, whether you're using Maya, Houdini, Cinema 4D, Blender, Modo. There's lots of, for the compositing functions, especially for the texture functions and even for the operation functions. Nodal operations is a really, really common, Nuke, Fusion, all of those. It's a really, really common thing to approach, but not just something we should probably take more of a look at. Next question.
Aaron Houseledge in Durham, North Carolina says, can we get another second hour overview on cloud production technologies, a review of available tools for streaming, editing, audio, and so forth?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we should probably have a second hour. Just put it in the second hour suggestions. Yeah, I think it's a great idea. Next question.
Nate Nicholson in Wake Forest, North Carolina says, do you have any suggestions for insurance carriers? I need to secure both workman's comp and general liability, but the carriers I've spoken to don't understand event production.
Yeah, I have to go back and look at who our broker is again. We had a broker for, we've had brokers. Most of them are out of LA because you really want someone who understands actual production. So what you want to look for is not insurance brokers, but production insurance brokers. And you want to find one that's in Los Angeles because those ones are the ones that really know what they're doing. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, talk to your fellow players in your market and find out, especially if they're in unions like SAG-AFTRA and stuff like that, they do so much of this kind of work. They will know the brokers who are familiar with the industry better than your general insurance broker.
Yeah, and here's the thing: is they also understand that when you call, you really need to have your certificates right now. If you get a regular insurance, getting that out of them is like, it'll take a couple days. You're like, you need to get rid of that. Anybody who tells you can't get your certificate for a couple days, you should fire that insurance company. Go ahead, Rupert.
Yeah, you could also ask around at your local rental house. Those guys will probably have some contacts and a network there that you could ask around.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
The insurance cert thing is really important. We had one of our producers up in Tahoe. She was shooting a wedding, long story. And the event location people were just poking the bear, trying to upset her because they weren't using their photographer. And they go, well, we're going to need a cert for $1 million. And she went, okay. And she literally got on her phone and I just emailed you a PDF. Done. Like, okay, fine. It was great.
Next question.
Danny Law in Malaysia is up next. He says, what determines the quality of your screen scrape visuals?
Go ahead, Chris.
Resolution and codec.
And graphics card. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I totally agree. It depends on how you're asking the question, but for me, I always try to go on a 4K monitor as it's matching. And then just recently, I'm learning more about, thanks to office hours, of not bringing white screen backgrounds into my screen scrapes because that could actually start to hurt people's eyes. So I'm doing more of the put it into like a Keynote and change the color scheme.
Yeah, I think that as we keep moving forward, I can tell you as someone who has a dark, the dark mode, and more people are going to dark mode. People who build stuff in light white mode, like their web pages, it hurts. So you're just like, oh, why are these people doing this? Next question.
Tony Moby Noon in Georgia. I have a spare port on my A10 Mini Pro and Ethernet port. Should I add a Raspberry Pi or a MacBook Pro 2012?
And when you say a spare port, you mean a spare HDMI port?
I meant connection. Apologies, Alex. I can connect the Raspberry Pi or the MacBook Pro with the Ethernet connection, so it can have its own individual connection.
Oh, I would. If you're talking about creating some kind of Ethernet management process, I'd probably use the Raspberry Pi just because it's cheaper and it's smaller, and I probably wouldn't. There's less that can go wrong. You just kind of set it up and run it. Set it and forget it. I probably wouldn't use the Mac for that because you can do other things with it. Next question.
James Babbitt in San Diego says, is there any news on Blackmagic Design's new product releases?
Not that I know of. Do we see anything on the page? I don't think I personally think that they may be challenged by the chip shortages, that there's just nothing to release because who knows when they're going to be able to ship it. I think that, and I personally think that that's why our HyperDecks don't have XLR in the back. The new HyperDeck Pros don't have XLR in the back, and so I think that that's probably why, is because they were able to bypass. We've had comments with almost everyone that the AKM fire is still affecting everybody's ability to get AD and DA converters. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I saw some thread on Twitter the other night, and I believe it had to do with Dante, but literally they were saying, yeah, we're kind of re-engineering a lot of our stuff to use different chips because we can't, there's certain chips we just absolutely can't get.
Yeah, and this
crazy.
I think that what we may see is a move from
to analog.
No, yeah, exactly. Move to analog. We're
back to tubes.
We're going to go back to wagons. We got horse processing. Anyway, so I think that we may see a move from FPGA to Atom processors. So moving from or some kind of RISC processor, or not RISC processor, but anyway, moving away. FPGAs are powerful, but not as powerful as a full CPU chip that we may start seeing go into devices so that they can build CPU solutions. It's less stable, it's a little more expensive, but it means it's more like, if you look, the software-defined systems have not been affected as much as the hardware-defined systems because they can just work around the chips. And right now we don't have tools that let us do that as effectively. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I get all the PR for Blackmagic, and I haven't heard anything on hardware. The last Resolve update was back, I believe, in November. But what they have been working on really heavily was their tutorials and really getting people up to speed on how to run the software and hardware, which I think is a very good move in this case.
Yeah. Next question.
Robert Soji in Los Angeles says, what's the best way to share a video on a normal Zoom call? I do have access to an ATEM Mini and have a video source into one input.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, you could put, if you have a hardware player or even a software, you could totally do that. You could bring it into your ATEM. One of the things that I do, and again, in my system, I have an ATEM that flows into the computer. I loop it through OBS and then into Zoom. So I have a, what is OBS calls it, a scene that is just a playback scene. And when I cut to that thing, whichever video that's in there that's highlighted, you poke its little eye and you make it the active one. When I cut to that scene, that video file just rolls. So it's, I know if you have a hyperdeck, you could do that with a hyperdeck and the ATEM also, but that was cheaper than a hyperdeck.
Good, Rupert.
It depends what you mean by a normal Zoom call. Not all Zoom calls are created equally. If you're in a 1080p meeting, you'll be able to feed a video in through your ATEM and it'll, look, you'll get the full res. But if you're not in a 1080p meeting and your video's of reasonable resolution, you're going to see a drop there most likely. If you're at a 360 meeting, you can do all the tricks maybe to get up to 720, but it just depends on what the video is you're showing. So unless you are in a 1080p meeting, it's likely going to look different, piping it in through a camera versus sharing screen or sharing the file.
The problem with sharing the screen is that you are you're giving up frame rate. So you have to choose on a lower end membership inside of Zoom. You have to choose between frame rate. Now, to Rupert's perspective, if you are showing like on a Keynote, if you have a Keynote without a lot of animations, you're better off doing screen share from that Keynote. If you're going to play videos out, then you're better off going through the switcher. The Playout B with a Raspberry Pi is probably the least expensive, easiest way to just kind of set things up if you have an ATEM to do it. If I'm using a software-based solution, I'm still using Memo Live, for that. So it allows, after 10 years, I think almost 10 years of saying, no, I'm not interested. It's like a green eggs and ham thing. I finally started using it, and I actually like the interface and like the setup that I have with it after telling poor Oliver that I wouldn't use it because it had a weird interface for a decade. I actually like the way it's set up in layers and with the kind of macros and so on and so forth that I can put together. Next question.
Next one comes to us from John Wallace in Detroit, Michigan. He says, does anyone have any experience with Microsoft Stream for live events or pre-recorded content?
Go ahead, Rupert.
The link I posted earlier for an earlier question kind of relates to this. I mean, I've seen Stream. It's perfectly serviceable. I've seen it the most success with it, I'd say, internal to an organization. So it may reside, it will, it's an Office 365, part of the Azure Office 365 system. So if you are a Office 365 tenant in an Office 365 organization and your users are internal and, all integrated in there and your teams and, back and forth, then it's an internal YouTube at that point, and it's, works perfectly well in that environment.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Tim Holm in San Lorenzo, California. Alex, what hardware is required for your telestrator, and does it require special software?
Yeah, so this is a very old Mac Mini. I think it might be a 2012 Mac Mini that I had laying around because the requirement is very, very low on it. So it's like a very old Mac Mini with a Wacom 1. So this is the least expensive Wacom tablet. The Wacom tablet sits in an ARM. I don't really have a way to show it to you right now. And then it goes out to an ATEM Mini as an input. And then the software itself is stuff that I had developed. And I keep on meaning to, I just need to find a programmer that wants to play long enough for me to release it as a product. I keep on going, I'm going to learn how to write code. So just because it's a simple program, but it does require somebody to code it. So that's the only thing that's stopping me from publishing it. And so
you're missing your calling, Alex.
I know. I have like, someday I'm going to find a programmer. Like Chris doesn't, Chris is so busy doing Makana, and that's his job, that I don't want to distract him by having him start doing hardware stuff. But I have like 10 apps that just make meetings easier that I either have parts of, or because this is part of a bigger app development that we did that actually controls the ATEM switcher. So it can do things like when I switch away from it, it'll automatically clear and do a bunch of other things. And so there's a bunch of other things that I want to build, and I just need to find a programmer to do it. Go ahead, Chris.
If I learn how to program and I start tackling your list of apps and I program them for you, can I name them?
Yes. Yeah. But you can't, no fruit and no vegetables. You cannot have it be like drawing banana, or drawing pineapple. I know that what you're going to do is you're going to make it like, you'll make it like pineapple, and then I'll have to live with it because I agreed to it. All right.
No, you name it something completely irrelevant, like potato. So your telestrator app will be called
Orangutan.
Lindsay Tech creme brulee.
Orangutan. All right. Next question.
Moving on, Eric Price in Kansas City. I've been asked to support streaming a local group's MLK event. Can I use the Flow 8 to pull a house mix into my computer for streaming out to the web, or should I send it straight to one camera like I do at my church?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, you can absolutely do this. The USB is a 10x2, which means 10 in and 2 out. So that goes straight to the computer from there. What I would do is and especially if they have a digital mixer, I would use one of their auxiliaries going into the Flow 8 and then an iPad control. So you could actually control the mix that's being sent to the stream. And then, of course, the USB right into the computer.
Yeah, you'll have a lot more control in the Flow 8 than you will from the camera. Next question.
Rupert McCrae, Dallas, Texas, up next with thoughts from the panel on the new -20 LUF standard in office hours. Are all the new background noises a distraction?
Go ahead, John.
It's funny you say that. I have a leaf blower guy right in my house right now, Rupert. How'd you know? The problem that I have, I started with Scarlett 2i2, and then I went to Claret, but the problem is the gain, the preamps on these things only are like 56 dB compared to Sound Devices, which are in the 70s. And so trying to drive something that needs a lot of power, like a Heil or a SM7B or an RE the Electro Voice, is a challenge.
Go ahead, Chris.
John, you were only hitting -22.
There you go.
The thing that we had was that one of the things that I noticed is we were getting more and more situations where people tested in at -24 and then we're coming in at -27 to -30. And it just, at 24 is okay on YouTube, not great. -27 and -29 is unlistenable. So that was the problem. Is I felt like going up to -20 gave us a little bit more room for people to go to to be at -22, -24, still have it work. We may go back to -24 when we go to Office Hours 2.0, because then I have a post process that I have access to, where I can because right now in the test feeds that we do on YouTube, which I've turned off for just a little while the guys are working and stuff, on those, I'm bumping the whole thing up. I'm bumping not by LUFs, but by literally I'm bumping by 6 or 8 dB up to just bring it up, and then it sounds great. But what I realize, I can just do that in the post process and not have to worry about it. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I think it's a good admonition for all of us that when we check our mics in the beginning and we're very much eyeballing the meter, that we don't have I've heard Bill mention it, your voice check voice,
Right.
you want to, and it's a good idea. I'm trying to and I don't do it well. I'm trying to watch the meter. I know that while I've been talking here, I've gone from -18 to -22. So we all need to kind of watch it.
I put the meter up next to me, right next to my, it's right in the main
I
situation.
put you next to me, Alex. What does that say?
Oh, that's so sweet. So, but I put it up, next to me so that I can see where I'm kind of at while I'm talking, to make sure that I'm conscious to it. Go ahead, Rupert, and then we're going to move on. We're running out of time.
So the level is fine. I was just making the point that it has brought some extra noises in now. We're hearing mouse clicks and more room from people and things like that. So that's now a difference between this and maybe some other YouTubers. A lot of those other other content is more controlled in background noise, and then we're up there in level, but they've got all these noises.
I think you're hearing my mouse, and the reason you're hearing my mouse is because I swapped mics, not because of the -20 negative. And the reason that you're hearing the mouse today is because I stopped using the magic pad because it makes me crazy. So I just needed. I'm trying to learn how to use the magic pad or whatever that I got, because it doesn't make any noise. The reason I got it doesn't make any noise. It's just that the functionality of it is just. I just don't understand why it doesn't work as a regular trackpad. Next question.
Next one comes to us from John Wallace in Detroit, Michigan. And John says, do office hours have any insight into when 4K video will become more standard across Zoom and other meeting platforms?
I don't think they're going to become standard across any of the platforms for very long, because it's the problem is even 1080p starts to break up. You're trying to do something in real time, and as you create 4 times more data, that's what 4K does. It's 4 times more data. To do that at a high quality with quality bits, that's really better off with a more specialized solution. Like we're going to be showing everybody Stream Voodoo soon, and that's the kind of thing that's specialized and built for that. And if you want to use it in a small amount, it makes sense to, with a smaller number of people. But when you're talking about providing conferences for it, I don't think it makes sense. Jeffrey, real quick.
Yeah, it's all about infrastructure too. I think we're going to see that in 10 years, we'll see this, but not right now.
Hopefully. If they keep on calling broadband 25 down and 3 up, not soon. We need fiber to the house. Next question.
Ernest Floyd in Bastrop, Louisiana says, I need a recommendation for a laptop chest bag. I'd like to put a MacBook Air and a 15-inch PC in it.
I don't think I have the bag and I can't think of the name of it right now. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Targus, Chad, they have several different options for multi-laptop bags.
Okay. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. He said, would there be any way to turn my Windows 10 license key into a Windows 11 license key?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So to do this, there is a website. I'm putting it right in Makana right now. You actually have to go through. You have to go through the checks to make sure. Once again, it will work on that PC. Once it downloads software, and then once it does the check, it'll give you a link to go to the download site. You can download Windows 11 and put it on there.
Next question.
Fleety, Indonesia says, do any of our panel have a successful process for shooting on large cove green screen with 2 camera angles, video footage, photos, or 3D, all welcome?
We've absolutely done that. In fact, that was the very first Mac Break records in 2005. 17 years ago, we were doing it in a large cove. It depends on how you define large cove. So we would say it's like 25 by 25 is what we would consider a large cove. The real problem is that you want to keep both of them in green. And as you get closer and closer to the screen, they're going to get more and more spill. So you just have to be very conscious to it. If you pull those cameras back a little bit, you can keep the people further away because their angle of view their field of view starts to become longer. So you can actually get 2 or 3 even cameras working. The hard angles become harder. Over the shoulder shots become a little bit more difficult. A lot of times what we do when multi-cameras, we have one master shot. And then if you're doing just a single L in a cove, then you'll end up with one camera going for close-ups on one side. The other side would require typically a U, or remember that you don't really need the cove a lot of time on close-up shots because you're not seeing their feet. The only time you need a cove is their feet. So what you can do is take that third wall and use a green screen that's just on a frame and put it behind them. The thing that becomes difficult with green screens when you're using multiple cameras is moving them. If you're moving them in real time, you really have to find a way to track them. And because the green, you're not putting markers on it because it's harder to key them in real time. You need a tracking system that's going to basically take inertial data, or not inertial, but positional data from the camera, as well as oftentimes tracking things in the ceiling to make that work. But you can't move the green screen. You can't move the camera if you can't track it because the background won't move with it. So so a lot of times you want to, in a lower budget area, you want to keep with a kind of fixed. And so you're going to use edit speed more than you'll use camera motion, in those areas because the camera motion has become a lot more challenging. Go ahead, John.
So this is the one cool feature about the TriCaster. It's got the virtual set up for 3 camera at different angles, and it automatically adjusts the angles accordingly. If you like computers that crash all the time, then look at NewTek.
Right. It has the feature. Whether the feature works all the time is a whole nother problem.
Extra excitement.
Yeah. I mean, if you're doing a lot of times, most of the stuff we do in multi-camera, at this point, you also could, I mean, there's a couple different ways. If you really want to use virtual backgrounds, the one that does work pretty well as far as telemetry data is the Panasonic 150s. Will send telemetry data back to to Unreal. So you can tie that back in so you can make those moves. I still would be a little hesitant to do panning while on camera, although you could probably pan and stop and move. If your backgrounds are fixed, probably the cheapest way to do it is get a bunch of little ATEM minis and run each camera into it and key it with that keyer, and then send those out to another ATEM so that you're just using the keying function in them. The keying function in the ATEMs is nothing to sneeze at. So it's got a really, really high quality one. And really the quality of your key has less to do with your keyer and more to do with your how you approach your lighting. So big soft lighting is going to make a big difference, having a very even key. And we're going to be, one of our Tuesdays, we're going to talk about green screen so that we can kind of talk about what works and doesn't. We've talked about it in the past, but I think it's always something we can bring back up again. All right. We answered a lot of questions today, 64 questions. It's not the record, but it's only 3 short of the record for one day. So well done by the producers for sending in all those great questions in for us to answer. Well done by the panelists for cutting through those questions and providing some great answers. And now we're going to reminder that Elle will be joining us at 2:00 for the for Isadora. So stay tuned for that. And we are definitely looking at some camera correction later today. So stay tuned for that. All right. We will now off we go.